Every time a new film or TV show comes out these days, there's crossover media to tie in with it and generate more money through the usage of branding. In a lot of these cases, it's a cynical ploy to extort money from fans of said media. But there have been plenty of times where that hasn't happened. So many in fact that this list is limited to PC titles from the 90s, and one title per franchise. Here's 10 of the best. Number 10. Chex Quest. Although the trilogy of Chex games was completed in 2008, and is the one you'll want to be seeking out, the original first part of Chex Quest was released in 1996 by General Mills, in boxes of Chex. The cereal, 5.7 million of them to be exact. It's far better than it had any right to be for a free promotional game, and that's because it runs on id Tech 1, aka the Doom engine. But since advertising a gory, hell-based shooter to small children wasn't a great idea, Digital Cafe were tasked with making a non-violent version instead. As the Chex Warrior, you are tasked with visiting the planet of Bezoik, and zorching all the evil and sticky phlegmoids back to their home planet. Since you're teleporting the monsters instead of killing them, there's technically no violence. But it's more or less a disguised version of Doom, which means the gameplay is terrific. With sequels and fan tributes and millions of fans across the world, it's fair to say that this blatant advertisement product was an excellent use of a license. Number 9. Star Trek The Next Generation, a final unity. The Star Trek license is hit or miss, but in the 90s there was a series of point-and-click games that used the voice acting from the cast, and put them in an original set of adventures. They were all good, but my favourite is a final unity from Spectrum Holobyte, a game that I feel captures the television series of The Next Generation better than any other title before or since. A mixture of bridge-based conversation, planetary point-and-click adventuring, and questionable combat sequences that don't entirely derail the game. Essentially, this plays like a latter season anthology of The Next Generation. The scripts are strong, the voice acting ranges from passable to excellent, and if you can get over the issues emulating this title and the fact that it doesn't have a nice, easy, pre-packaged digital version to buy, then Star Trek fans should have a blast with this one. Number 8. Mech Warrior 2. The Battletech license consists of giant robots called battle mechs attacking each other relentlessly on various planets. This board game was clearly worth translating into a computer game, and it was in the 80s by two great developers in Westwood and Dynamics. But it wasn't until the mid-90s that technology had come far enough to really give you the feeling of being inside one of these giant 3D accelerated robotic vehicles of destruction. Activision leaned gleefully into that, taking cues from flight and space combat simulators and developing a highly tactical and detailed combat game that catered for various methods of control depending upon the player's desired level of involvement. If you wanted to mindlessly blast at things, you could, and if you wanted to independently manage every part of a mech and its teammates, you could. In every battle, there was a goal for your hulking mech to accomplish, and in between each of these missions and their briefings was the ability to trick your mech out with all kinds of upgrades and customizations. And with 32 missions to shoot through and 2 additional expansions, there was plenty of content for you to attack. Number 7. Dune. The fact that one of my favourite DOS games is so low on this list should give you a clue about the quality of the rest. I prefer Dune to Dune 2, there I said it. It's more faithful to the ideas of the original book, and despite the plot deviating somewhat from the original narrative, Arrakis feels more alien and distinct than in Westwood's pioneering RTS. You are cast in the role of protagonist Paul Atreides, and told to recruit the Fremen to mine the spice of Dune. But your hated rivals, the Harkonnens, are also on the planet, and eventually you're gonna have to deal with them. Before that happens, you're thrust into a first-person adventure story with an RTS overworld that runs seamlessly in real time. Those familiar with the channel will know that I've talked about Dune a lot, and why I've done that. So I'm gonna cut this entry off short before I continue talking about Dune endlessly. Number 6. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, a point-and-click adventure based on a science fiction short story. This macabre retelling is chock full of terrific philosophical ideas and dialogue, which makes sense given that the story was written by award-winning science fiction author Harlan Ellison. The nightmarish future he has constructed with a horrific artificial intelligence isn't for the squeamish, and you're thrown all kinds of ethical dilemmas conveyed to you through metaphorical landscapes constructed by the AI. But where this game differs from other licensed products is that the original creator was also one of the lead designers and voice actors of the game. Having a Hugo and Nebula award-winning writer drafting 130 pages of script for you based on his original work and being the principal antagonist for your video game helps a great deal. The end product wasn't a mega hit, with only modest sales. The critical reception was much more positive though, and its mature themes and dialogue set it apart from many of the more light-hearted or comedic adventures of the time, and to this day is considered one of the dark classics of the point-and-click adventure genre. Number 5. Betrayal at Crondor. From here on in, every game on this list is now the complete reverse of the previous entry, and Betrayal at Crondor is a good first example of what I'm yammering on about. This game licensed the Rift War world from Raymond Feist, but the original author had very little to do with the development of the game. So strong was the writing from Neil Halford and John Cutter that the original author canonized their work by writing a novelization of the main plot of the game years after release. Betrayal at Crondor is a mostly first-person RPG with huge swaths of narrative and descriptive text that immerses you in its world for a good 60 to 100 hours without letting go. Sure, the combat engine isn't going to win anyone's hearts and minds, and the art style is very hit and miss, working with low-res video capture instead of hand-drawn like contemporaries, and it does take a lot of time and effort to traverse the outdoor areas, but for those who enjoy high fantasy, and Feist's work in particular, like I do, and have a soft spot for narrative-heavy fantasy that plays more like interactive fiction, will find themselves diving headfirst into this game and not emerging without first declaring it a mighty fine adventure indeed. Number 4. Blade Runner. It would have been very easy for Westwood to have stuck to the script of the Blade Runner movie, itself licensed from Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which I finished reading in a single sitting. But then they wouldn't be the Westwood everyone fondly remembered if they did that. Instead of controlling Rick Deckard, we're instead planted into an almost entirely original side story based in the same world and location, and rather than a burnt-out cop, we're a detective with a taste for justice, tracking down dangerous android replicants which are almost indistinguishable from humans. The adventure runs in real time and features several of the film's characters and bits of a wonderful Vangelis score. There are also glimpses of Deckard, but no way was Harrison Ford going to be coaxed into voicing him. The 3D rendering and atmosphere of the game give it a distinct look and feel, and having Frank Klepacki doing the rest of the soundtrack certainly didn't hurt. Between that, the multiple endings, and the excellent script and voice acting, this adventure is one that every cyberpunk fan should witness. Number 3. Planescape Torment. Between Goldbox, the Eye of the Beholder trilogy, Dark Sun and Baldur's Gate, there was a lot of choice for the best Dungeons & Dragons game from the 90s to feature on this list. But in the end, despite all the choices, there really was only one option. Planescape is a series of planes of existence linked via interdimensional portals. You wake up on a mortuary slab and have no idea who you are or how you got there. You also soon discover that no matter how you die, you end up back on this slab. Your immortal body returned to witness the planes all over again. A friendly floating skull attempts to counsel you on matters, will happily follow you around as a companion, and has a lot of wisecracking to do. Running on a modified version of the Infinity Engine and suffering a difficult developmental process, Planescape Torment's combat is subpar. Its inventory management and general systems decidedly average, and everything is functional but uninspiring. And yet, here it sits at number 3 on my list, and fans of the game will know why. The script runs to almost 1 million words, which makes it the third largest role-playing game in terms of dialogue ever written. If it was a book, it would have been over 1,000 pages of reading, which is probably why it has 3 separate novelizations. Planescape Torment is art. The setting, the plotting, the writing all transcend the limited graphics and gaming systems on display. To this day, over 20 years later, nothing comes close. You'll have to excuse the vagueness. It's a weaving tale so full of mystery and intrigue and heartache that I can't discuss it without spoiling it in some way. Despite there being many games better to play than this one, there will likely never be another game with a narrative quite as good as Planescape Torment. Number 2. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. When your game is so highly praised that it's simply referred to as Indiana Jones 4, rather than by its subtitle, you know you've done well in capturing the spirit of those pulpy and highly regarded adventure movies. To do this in the medium of a point-and-click adventure game was especially impressive. LucasArts had already deftly translated one of the movies into this genre, but Fate of Atlantis was its own beast entirely, because it wasn't based on anything. Hal Barwood and Noah Falstein's original story was backed by the rest of the LucasArts crew at their absolute peak. An inspired score that borrows motifs from John Williams, art and animation that rivaled anything available at the time, and 3 different narrative versions of the game to play depending upon your choices was absolutely unheard of until this point. The dry wit of Jones was amped up, and he was matched by his potential sidekick and verbal foil in Sophia Hapgood. You travel across the globe searching for the ancient city of Atlantis before the Nazis can uncover it, and with 2 recurring villains and a host of henchmen, you'll have plenty of action to indulge in. It could have been the 4th movie, perhaps it should have been, and it's yet another license that involves Harrison Ford but doesn't involve him in the game, with Doug Lee doing a serviceable impression and the rest of the cast ranging from tolerable to excellent for the most part. For my money, it's the best adventure game ever written, and fans of indie should immediately give it a try. Number 1. Star Wars Yoda Stories. Nah, just kidding. Star Wars TIE Fighter! Yes, I know. Like the inexorable passage of time and the rebels destroying any spherical-shaped station designed to destroy planets, TIE Fighter at number 1 in this list was inevitable. A game that has received more mention and praise on this channel than any other, TIE Fighter tells an original story about Marek Stell, a Force-sensitive pilot who has joined the Empire in the middle of their attempts to wipe out the last of a rebellion. It starts with the aftermath of Hoth, and concludes right before the Battle of Endor. Throughout this space combat simulator, you're given missions by your flight officer. You start as a lowly and expendable rookie in an unshielded TIE fighter which can take 1 or 2 hits, and then it's done. You graduate to better craft and more difficult scenarios for you to navigate through, and this sense of progression is also reflected in the attitude of your fellow pilots and officers, who begin to rely upon you extensively, and your chest begins to fill with medals as you move up the ranks. The combat engine is dated but surprisingly playable, with the game taking its cues from Lawrence Holland's earlier World War flight combat simulators. What starts as simple tasks like stopping drug smuggling and settling local disputes cascades into a deep story of intrigue behind the scenes, and it all eventually catches up with you. The game was the first to portray the Empire as the keepers of the peace and order within the galaxy, and opened the gateway for both future Imperial perspectives and the usage of characters created by the Star Wars novels rather than the movies, thanks to extensive appearances from Timothy Zahn's Vice Admiral Thrawn. Fortunately, despite its age, fans of Star Wars can now experience TIE Fighter in a brand new way, with the release of TIE Fighter Total Conversion for the X-Wing Alliance Upgrade project, which features all 13 battles of the original campaign, and an even better reimagined campaign that utilises more than 40 craft at a time on the screen. Go check it out today. And if you enjoyed that shameless plug, feel free to check out all the other 10 of the best videos in this handy playlist, or just check out my scripted stuff, and check out the channel in general. I have hundreds of other videos talking about old PC games. Until next time.